prior to our June meeting, we had each of the committees present as well as each of the each of the core partners. And so now it's just a little bit of a broadening out that landscape and showing what all is included in the workforce development system. And so, Justin, I'll let you have the floor.
Sure. Thanks, Amy. Hi, everybody. I'm Justin Arnold. I'm the director of Workforce Board in East Central Illinois. That's the Champaign area. And then I'm the vice president of Illinois Workforce Partnership. Illinois Workforce Partnership is the state association of local workforce boards. So board directors, grant administrators, some program staff are all IWP members. And I'm going to give you all a quick overview of Title I as it has to do with local workforce boards. It's going to be a lot of information. I'm going to kind of speed through it because I know we wanted to keep this around 15 minutes. If we want to take a deeper dive in a committee or a task force, or if you want a one-on-one and where we talk about these things, I'd be available for a little deeper dive in the future. But for now, just wanted to present a quick overview of things like structure and services and kind of big goals for the next 4 years, so you get a sense of who we are as local workforce boards and what we do. You can go to the next slide, please. And we'll go to the next slide also. Okay, local workforce boards, overview and purpose. You know, with WIOA, there's 4 titles, Title 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then there's other folks that are involved in workforce development, Perkins, Youth Build, Job Corps, etc. So when you think about Title I, you think about how it provides funding for state workforce boards, which is what you all do, statewide activities, which is what DCO does and what the ICSPS does, what some other universities are contracted to do, those statewide kind of research and technical assistance activities. And then Title I also funds local boards and funds some other programs. So Title I does a lot. With Title I, the state boards help shape the environment, which is what you all are doing. For example, you're going through a strategic planning process right now and saying this is what we want to do in Illinois and who we want to be as a workforce system. So you're shaping the environment. And then state agencies interpret and apply policy. So a DCO, IDS, ICCB, they're talking to the federal departments and looking at laws and looking at state policies, and they interpret that and apply that in the work of different entities. Local boards work with the state board and those state agencies. We collaborate with the governor and state boards and state agencies to serve communities. So the purpose of the local board is to develop operational plans and strategies for local service delivery. So you can see big picture, state boards, state agencies, maybe bigger than that, federal law, federal administration, and then on the ground, it's local workforce boards, and they're in charge of operational strategies and plans for local workforce areas. Next slide. The structure, I think, excuse me, of Title I when it comes to local workforce boards is something that's probably not really understood. So I'm going to take 2 slides to talk about it a bit. And hopefully after these 2 slides, you just have a little bit of a better understanding of the structure of workforce boards. There is those Title I funds that go to state boards and the state agency and to the statewide activities. But then most of the state's Title I funds, that allocation goes to local workforce areas and are awarded to county governments. So county governments are a player in this system. The chief elected officials, or CEOs, are the county board chairs, usually from each county. So those are elected officials. And those CEOs in an area can form a consortium and appoint a grant administrator. So, for example, in my area, there's 5 counties. They're the LWIA 17 consortium, and the Regional Planning Commission is their grant administrator. Those county government folks also appoint local workforce board members, and they leverage the board for required activities. Think of maybe like a city council appointing a planning commission. The planning commissions members are helping the city council with planning. And this in workforce development, the workforce board helps the CEOs with workforce development, and they have required activities that are mandated by law. Workforce board members are primarily employers, and there's also economic development, labor, uh, titles 2, 3, and 4. Some other folks are required to be on workforce boards, basically the same members of the state board, if you're familiar with that. Workforce boards have required functions. Some of those functions include regional planning, convening, and best practices. So those Title I funds go to county governments. County governments appoint a workforce board. Workforce boards have members. They have required functions. Next slide. Workforce boards can hire staff to execute required functions and coordinate board meetings. So when you hear things like a board director, that's the staff to the board. Most areas have a director and assistants to help with the administrative tasks of the board and also to facilitate and execute the required functions of the board. In addition to being a board and having required functions, local boards are also responsible for procuring a one-stop operator and for procuring service providers for Title I services. So the local board itself sometimes provides those services, but they also can have a one-stop operator and service providers for all those services. And that's where it gets a little complicated or a little bit muddy because when you go to 22 different areas, the chief elected officials, the workforce boards, all make different decisions about how they're going to operate their one stop and who's going to provide services. And that's why you have a little bit of confusion because it's not shared branding from the top down. It's really LWIA by LWIA has subtle differences. Boards are monitored annually by DCEO, and DCEO also provides ongoing technical assistance. And so that relationship with DCEO is a collaborative one where local workforce boards are overseeing services, making sure services are provided. DCEO is over monitoring and providing technical assistance. So if you think about the 4 titles in Illinois, it seems like ICCB and DCEO operate similarly in that they're at the state level, but then in local areas, the entities that execute have a little bit more autonomy. For example, community colleges are overseen by ICCB, but they have a lot of autonomy. In a similar way, local workforce boards, although they're overseen by DCO, have a lot of autonomy. Whereas DOORS and IDS programs are really from the top down, have a state agency structure. For local workforce boards, they can belong to the Illinois Workforce Partnership. It's IWP, and that's a state of association of local workforce boards with directors and grant administrators, program staff, where we tackle issues that are important to local areas. So that's the structure. Hopefully it clarifies some things a little bit. If you're in this for a while, usually some of this stuff is an aha. But if you're new to it, it can be a little overwhelming. Next slide. So you have the structure there, and at the end of the day, though, right, we want to provide services. So the structure is important so that there's representation from employers and unions and economic development so that someone's not unilaterally just making decisions about job training programs and they're not effective or tied to industries or jobs. And then so that there's accountability. That's why there's government oversight, is because it's public funds and you want both input but also oversight. But then at the end of the day, you are also providing services. So I'm going to go over some of the services that Title I provides through local workforce boards and also try and describe some of the eligibility requirements when it's applicable. For one, local workforce boards provide an opportunity for employers and stakeholders to engage and improve the system. So when you think about that local workforce board, you really want to think about the service of getting people together to talk through local challenges and opportunities. So that's a service. Eligibility for that is just be in the area and want to come to the table. It's really open to the public. one-stop operators, those folks that are procured by workforce boards, they manage American Job Centers, those physical sites, satellite offices, technology, websites. They manage those job centers in local areas and the one-stop delivery system. So the services that one-stop operators provide is that they're getting everyone together and making sure that services are managed well and getting to the right folks and that partners can work together. So for example, in our area, the one-stop operator is helping the community college, the adult ed program, DOORS, DHS, TANF, CSBG, Perkins, etc., all work together. So they're providing a service to the community. Eligibility for that is just to participate in an MOU. Customers have universal access to basic career services at American Job Centers. So at American Job Centers, anyone can come in regardless of income or employment status and receive basic career services. So labor market information, job search assistance, eligibility determination. The eligibility for those services, there is none. If you walk in off the street into an American Job Center, you should be able to get those services. Customers can also access core and required partners in a local area, Title 1, 2, 3, 4, Perkins, housing, etc. So the one-stop delivery system, the service it provides is helping customers gain access to all core and required partners in the workforce system and help determine eligibility for those services. Next slide, please. This service is provided and eligibility continued. So when you think about a workforce board, it's getting people together, it's having them address issues together, it's coordinating partners and getting services aligned and to community members. It's providing a place for people to walk in and get services and get connected to every partner in the workforce development system. And that is all through Title I. But then Title I also has specific services. So Title I includes career and training services for youth, adults, dislocated workers, and employers. Youth eligibility is determined by a mix of school status, age barriers, and possibly low-income criteria. Those services are usually more exploratory and preparatory remedial in nature. So maybe exploring healthcare, while completing a GED and thinking about your post-secondary education and employment future. So it's exploratory, usually with a mentoring element. Adult eligibility is determined by a mix of low income criteria and basic skills deficiency criteria. Adult programs through Title I are basically going back to school with a case manager who coaches you to success, provides supportive services like child care assistance and transportation assistance, and then adults, they're having their tuition paid for. So Title I is serving those adults with job training. Individualized training services and eligibility can be either low income or basic skills deficiencies. One or the other. It doesn't need to be both. Dislocated worker eligibility is determined by dislocated worker status. Some people think that means just laid off, but there's other things that it can also capture, like a displaced homemaker or the spouse of a veteran who's moved across the country. So dislocated worker captures several different types of folks, and those people can get the same sort of services that adults can with individualized training. So going back to school, getting support while you're in school, helping to find employment after school, those training services, dislocated workers are eligible for those. One of the last services that Title I offers is business services, and business services are things like customized training, on-the-job training where you're paying for wages and providing support services during the first 6 months of a person's employment. You're trying to help them kind of overcome some barriers and make sure they stay on the job. So business services can include paying for customized training on the job training, but it also can support things like human resource and organizational development consulting, or consulting on apprenticeship expansion and other work-based learning activities. So the idea there is to have a specialist who can help businesses think through some of those HR and OD components and work-based learning components and help them make informed decisions. Business service eligibility is determined primarily by location of business, the type of training, the cost of training, and the impact of training. Impact meaning to the people who will receive the training, are they going to get a promotion or keep their job? Um, and some of this eligibility, as far as types of training and cost of training, is determined by a local workforce board. Next slide. In addition to the services of the board in general and the services of Title I to adults and youth and dislocated workers employers, it's important for the IWIB to know that local workforce boards also usually apply for and receive other grants to conduct services. So that's non-Title 1B, but those services are integrated into the infrastructure of a one-stop delivery system with partners, American Job Centers with sites, and the career services and training services, business outreach that are already being provided. So it's important to think of local workforce boards being the state's infrastructure for workforce development, and knowing that in addition to Title I, workforce boards are pursuing other grants. So that could be CJA, it could be apprenticeship expansion, state supplemental funding, job training and economic development, USDOL funding like hubs or good jobs, any other type of funding. And so when you think about the workforce system, you can think about growing the infrastructure can happen through pursuing other types of grants besides Title I that complement what Title I already does. So places where people can get help with employment and career and job training services. Okay, next slide. I left these blank intentionally just to show you a picture of what we could dive into in the future. These were more criteria that I thought might be interesting for you all to think about. And if you wanted to take a deeper dive in the future, I'd be open to that. I'll just say that last year, as a state, the funds that went to the 22 local workforce areas was 125 million. And so we have to think about, what does that pay for? It pays for staff who help one-stop visitors. It pays for partner referrals. It pays for career services for adult and dislocated workers, helping people find jobs. It pays for training services to adult and dislocated workers. People are going back to school. It pays for youth activities, helping young people with barriers become college and career ready. It pays for supportive services like housing and transportation and childcare. It pays for business services like incumbent worker training grant, work experiences for youth, rapid responses for mass layoffs. And then we think about performance, which is the outcomes of Title I primarily are skills gains, credential attainment, employment, and wages. So a very practical impact by our grants. And then how does other grants and activities factor into what the workforce system does? So these are the things over time, I know we talked about in the retreat, that we'd like, that the state board would like more information. These are some data points we could explore together and think about what it means and where there's opportunities for growth and improvement. Next slide. Okay, if you think about the collection of workforce boards, 22 in the area, I'm sure that we all have different goals because we're thinking about our local areas. And Chicago is different from Quincy, which is different from Ford County, which is different from Springfield. And so the goals of local workforce boards are different, and that's okay. That's what's supposed to happen. Decentralized planning and local innovation is kind of the name of the game with workforce boards, and that should be okay and supported. But as a state association of workforce boards and how we relate to the state, we do have some goals. One is increased visibility in Illinois as part of the national and state workforce development system infrastructure. That local workforce boards are here, they exist, and they should be seen. Another one is local workforce boards are for everyone in education, workforce, and economic development, not just Title I. So there's kind of a misunderstanding in our state that local workforce boards are just for Title I. As you can see from the discussion where we just had with all the board members and partners, local workforce boards are for everybody. A goal is for local workforce boards to be seen as a partner, convener, facilitator, and innovator, and not as bureaucracy. And that is incumbent on us who work for workforce boards to try and make that happen, but also for others to see the value in those boards. Some of the value that we hope to add or demonstrate is for employers and to job seekers and workers in a local workforce area through workforce development activities that folks at the IWIB and throughout the state would see the value of employment and career and training services to youth and adults, dislocated workers, and businesses, and that we'd see that as a valuable infrastructure worth investing in. And lastly, we'd like to be viewed as experts in micro and macroeconomic trends throughout the state. That is kind of a reach goal. Some of us are more focused on our program, and we're all busy writing grants and trying to report on grants, and sometimes you get stuck in the day-to-day activities and just trying to do your best to stay afloat and make sure people get back to school or through training. But I think we're all talking about how do we get better at being experts in micro and macroeconomic trends throughout the state and contribute to these bigger discussions about the state's economic development plan, the future of our state, the future of work, and so on. So that is kind of a reach goal, but those are our priorities as a state association of local workforce boards. I believe that's the last slide.
Yep.
Okay, I tried to keep it under 15 minutes. I did, I think.
Yeah, you
So,
did great.
okay.
But I do want to open the floor now. Are there any questions for Justin about his presentation? You post those in the chat if you'd like, or just feel free to unmute. You should all be able to unmute.
Justin, I have a question. As far
Yes.
as the makeup of the IWP, I know that you noted it's not just Title I, but do you know how many people on the IWP are outside of Title I?
Well, let me clarify. Local workforce boards are made up of everybody.
Okay.
Yep. The State Association of Local Workforce Boards is primarily just Title I directors and program managers.
Gotcha.
So two different things. One is local workforce boards, and then the other is the State Association of Local Workforce Boards, where you're primarily looking at directors, and that's pretty standard across America. So if you go to the Maryland State Association or the Oregon State Association of Local Workforce Boards, you're really looking at directors of local workforce boards. The state associations of workforce boards that have a bigger impact, the way that they engage the entire workforce system is by being more involved in professional development. So, for example, Michigan's Work State Association just did their professional development conference for the state, and all the titles were there. And the Maryland Association of Workforce Boards, they just partnered with NADUP to do a business service academy for the whole country, and any title and anyone in workforce could go to that. As a state association, right now, we're not at a place where we're doing those kinds of professional development activities on a statewide level. We're working with you all and with the WIOA Summit. So that's where we see some real opportunities for collaboration as far as impact on professional development.
Okay, great.
Any other questions for Justin? So this was our one presentation for today. Next week, you will also have opportunity to join us. We will be hearing from ICCB post-secondary. We'll be hearing from ICCB secondary. We'll be hearing from SNAP, TANF, and Veterans Affairs, all the IDES programs that are required partners as well. So every day, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at lunch, the Zoom link should be on your calendar. So please join us and you can learn more about some additional required partners that are in the workforce development system. With that, thank you very much for your time today and have a great afternoon and a good weekend.